Uh, our guest speaker tonight is Chris Anderson. Chris grew up in northern Indiana and studied wildlife science at Purdue University, following which he received his master's at Kansas State University. And for that degree, he worked with the USGS Kansas Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit, studying the effects of river recreation on wildlife in Nebraska. Chris then continued moving westward, skipping over a few in-between states, and ended up in Washington. After a few different stints here and there, he landed at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife in 2006. So he's coming into his 20th year with W.D.F.W, and he is currently the District Wildlife Biologist for the entire King County area. This district is unique being the most urban district in the state, with many species of wildlife and 1/3 of the human population of Washington State. Those of us who get to work with him are amazed at how much he does get to manage. So this evening, Chris will be presenting on common loon management here in Washington State. So I turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for thinking of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife for a discussion. And thanks for having me. Yeah. So yes, I am it's what we call District 12, which is King County. And yes, King County is the most urban wildlife district in the state. As you know, we've got about let's see, what is it? 2 million people in the state, 800,000 in King County, and it was like 200,000 in Seattle or something like that. So it's like 30, 30, 30. And it's the 12th most populated county in the Union, actually. So lots of people and still lots of wildlife, which is pretty crazy. And it's great, but poses some, I say now, poses the I-5 corridor conundrum. But in any case, because I see all the Puget Sound districts becoming urban already. And so we're just, it's the new way. So we're dealing with conflict more often than we are increasing opportunity. So, and we're trying to retain things around. So anyhow, enough about King County, because we know King County well. If you have problems with birds of the world and you have a Snohomish County library card, you can access birds of the world free through Snohomish County Library as well. Seattle used to have it. Last I corresponded with Seattle Library, they got rid of it, but maybe they have it back. So just a FYI on that too. We use that often for work here at DFW. So it's a great resource. So anyways, I'm here to talk a little bit about common loons in Washington. I'm a local biologist, management biologist, not one of our research scientists. So I'm pretty hyper local with King County and at least King County north to the border on this side of the Cascades and this side of the islands, which is the region I'm assigned to, which is the North Puget Sound region. And we have a small loon population on the west side of the mountains, and we have another population in the northeast part of the state that's a bit larger. And we're going to talk about that more broadly tonight, and then a little bit of notes on King County birds. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see that?
There we go.
There we go. That's good.
Good?
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, because I don't see you, so I'm just going for this. So, all right. So common loons of Washington. Common loons are one of really five. We have 5 species worldwide, and really 3 of them largely occur here in Washington, either in the wintering period and or in the resident breeding period, being common loon. So common loon is our resident breeder in small numbers. We have about 34 known territories or suspected. Then we have Pacific and red-throated that are a little more common in the winter and regular. Every winter we have Pacific and red-throated. We have the occasional yellow-billed in the winter, a little bit more rare, but crops up. And then we have the much more rare Arctic loon that at one time wasn't even considered to winter in our, it really doesn't winter in our waters, but will show up as a vagrant at times, and people have spotted a couple of them. So, and when I say a couple, that's not a hard number, but not many like Pacific or red-throated are common. So, and less than yellow-billed. So anyways, this is your stereotypical common loon, but let's look at some other things in relation to the rest of these loons. So here is your common loon. Most of the photos in this presentation I want to put out there are either some of mine, if they are less professional looking, or they are our collaborators and Biodiversity Research Institute adjunct scientists Dan and Ginger Polshuk, which live over in Northeast Washington. Were both of them very instrumental in starting the Loon Lake Loon Association, which is now defunct, but they are still involved with Biodiversity Research Institute, which are one of the preeminent loon research NGOs in the world. And Dan and Ginger have been so kind to let WDFW borrow their photos occasionally. And they get much closer with their lens than I do. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate everything they've done for loons in the state of Washington and their mentorship to a number of us bios. So there's Common Loon. Here is our yellow-billed loon. Shocking, right? Yellow bill looks very similar to a common loon in breeding plumage. So when it's in here, it's not going to really look like that, but when it's in alternate plumage, that is it. We have our Pacific loon. Note how it doesn't have any white down here. That's a little thing to remember later. Here we have our red-throated loon. Again, all these are in breeding plumage in their alternate plumage. Not really what we see in winter here. This is the Arctic loon. You'll see it has this very small little white patch here that's really hard to see when it's out on the ocean or out in the sound. But that is what largely delineates that. There are some other little tiny, smaller things, if that's not small enough, that delineates this species from the Pacific loon that used to be considered one species. But they nest in separate areas in the high Arctic. Here is the common loon in winter plumage, in its eclipse plumage. And this is pretty much what all those 5 loons we just looked at somewhat look like. They're basically variations of gray and white when they're in the winter. So you're looking at head shape, behavior. Are they grouped up more? So for example, Pacific loons and red-throated loons tend to run in groups a little bit more. Common loons are more solo. Yellow-billed loons are more solo. Arctic, if we have one, it's probably going to be by itself. So I can't say it's going to group up because they're the most rare. But this is what they look like. And in the winter, we're largely looking for a drabby, large bird that's got about a 4-foot wingspan to 4.5. And also is about 2 to 3 feet length. They are very sexually dimorphic. The males tend to be about 28% larger than the females. And you have a bird that can range anywhere from about 8 pounds to about 19 pounds. So with the males being on that large end. So in any case, their range, where it is currently, is where you see the red there in breeding. That's its North American breeding range. Considered stable in its the thick of its range, but has had a lot of recession in the southern end in the lower 48. So, and we'll talk about that more here in a little bit. And also some of the efforts that are being done both in the state of Washington, but also range wide. So, and again, I've got a little bit of a head cold. So if I cough or something, I apologize. So, and on that note, so the common loon is a very common winter resident, rare breeding resident, but we have them. Again, North American range stable. And since the 20th century really had, they never were very ubiquitous on the West Coast, but really had range retraction over the 19th and early 20th century. So this is where common loons were both historically and through the present. So you can see the dark brown over here. This is the original historic range back in the 19th century, went all the way down to Mount Shasta in California. So there are documented breeding and nesting loons in small numbers throughout this whole range. Most of the loons historically have been in Washington, I should say, have been in Western Washington. So Western Washington historically was the stronghold that, at least what we know of both current, let's say current historical data since the, let's say the 80s through about 2018, 19. And then prior to that. So Western Washington being where most of the small amount of historical records being noted is what I'm trying to say. So we've had a little range expansion into, again, the northern and northeastern part of the state in these areas here, and then also thick of the range there. And we had some increases of those population that we'll talk about. And we've seen the same thing here where we've had this range retraction in some of these northerly tier states, and even losing production in some of the states in the lower 48 that most of us think, you know, are historically kind of the stronghold in the lower 48, like some of our Great Lakes states. So anyhow, before we get into some more specifics about loons, how we manage them, their biology, everybody here, and it's already been mentioned with some folks that were on earlier, is very familiar with some of the loon sounds that are out there. That's sort of the stereotypical, you know, charismatic Northwoods bird that people think of. However, you'd be really surprised how many people out there still don't know what a loon is until you play them a whale, which will be coming up here in a little bit. But first, I wanted to play a little excerpt of a territorial male that is giving his yodel, which is only the males give, and it's their territorial advertisement song call. And they also will use it at times for territorial interactions, like male versus male, or male and just intruder. You know, it could be another female. Long distance territorial singing. So when they are giving that call, you know, in the wee hours in the morning before sunlight all the way through early morning, they're trying to, project that across an area of their natal lake and their territory there. And so part of what they do is exactly what you're going to see in this bird. It extends its head out. It uses the water to deflect the sound, and they get pretty darn loud. So they also use this at times just to give a signal to make sure their mate's nearby. A mate gives a different little callback as far as that goes. But it's in its first purpose a territorial call, only given by the males. And you'll note that a lot of the calls, the four main calls that loons give, and they have other little calls, and the chicks have little calls too. But these four calls all can be interspersed with each other. The only time you're going to get an animal giving a yodel is if it's a male, though. And it is, firstly, its territorial call. So here we go. So in that moment there, you heard two of the other four calls that we're going to be getting to, both the whale and the tremolo, which have more of contact and intruder purposes, and also just disturb. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. But as you can see, those are often interspersed. So they're not normally given just by themselves, except for that rare moment, like early in the morning, there's no other intruders, and the male is, he's stretching his wings and he wants to make himself known. So, and then the mate starts after that usually. So here we go. The whale, this is the one that everybody knows. This is the one that you play it for the general public. They're going to hear it. They may not know what a common loon is, and then you have that conversation, but this is the one people know. It's kind of a location status with their mate. It can carry far. And if a lake's nearby, within a mile or two, sometimes this can carry just like the yodel. Or to the other side of a lake. We have lakes that are, here in Washington, 300 acres, and a bird can be tucked around one bay on one end of the lake, and the other one can be tucked around the other end of the lake on the bay, and nowhere in between do they see each other. And it's still hard to hear some of these sometimes. So anyways, they've really worked on how to project their calls. So again, well known, where's my mate? I am over here, you are over there. Night chorusing, when the male is giving his yodel, and then both the male and female are giving wails, and duetting that way. In general communication for, again, if they're stressed out and they got an intruder, whether it be another bird or a predator, eagles overhead, river otter, bear, you got it. So anyhow, and here we go. All righty. So that is the whale, the most well-known. The other one of the three most common calls, and then we have a fourth we'll get to here next, is the tremolo, otherwise known as the laugh, because it sounds like they're kind of in this rapid manic laugh. Pardon me. I did take decongestion before this, and it seems to be helping. The alarm call is the tremolo. It's often used in very rapid fashion amongst various individuals on a territory or lake. Definitely the pairs first, but often the intruder or usurper starts along right with it. They will give it for other loons. They will give it for other ducks. They will give it for other mergansers. They will chase off any other waterfowl. They're very, very territorial, and they want this lake for themselves, and they make it well known when they're territorial. So when we show up to a lake and we see bufflehead or ringneck duck, and we see the loon going right by them, we know that they are not being territorial at that time for the most part. It still requires a follow-up, but is not promising if the loon's letting everybody hang. So particularly on a smaller territory where they can't get out of each other's sight. So they often give this when they're flying over a territory to announce their presence, either taking off or leaving. Well, it's kind of an excitement thing, I would say, but I'm not the expert on this. I'm not the one writing all this in the papers, but that's my take when I see it. So we have a territory that I'll talk about later, but it's quite small, and the loons have to do some pretty physical, interesting things to get in and out of that territory. And this is a very common call whenever they're doing it. And it's almost like they're kind of excited and saying, hey, I'm leaving, or hey, I'm coming back. So again, most commonly given when there's territorial interactions, negative ones in particular, but positive ones with the female when she returns to about a week after the male or so. And again, I mentioned that it's used at night when they have their duet whale coursing. So here's the tremolo, and it definitely sounds like a laugh. Okay, so our last and fourth common call, which is not as common, and really you need to be pretty close to these guys when they're given this hoot. It's a close proximity family unit call or territorial pair call. It's usually kind of, hey, I'm here, where are you? You're there. Hey, where's the chick? The chick's maybe being hidden in emergent vegetation in a nursery area. The one loon dropped it off there. The other loon, it comes in and starts giving little hoots, hey, where are you? Are you here? And the chick will find the adult then that way. And just when they're going around with the young, I've had them, just when they go by me, it's almost like a, hey, it's okay. I'm here. Nothing's wrong. Right here, as they move slowly past the two-legged biologist that's trying to figure out where they've spent most of their time all summer. So anyways, so here's the hoot, and it's much softer, but you should be able to hear it. That's an adult male on the left, or adult on the left, and a chick, a young of the year on the right, an older one. And notice that's not coming from either of those birds, so that's most likely the other mate. Okay, did it stop? Okay, there we go. All right, can everyone still hear me okay? And did that come through fine? Because we've had a little bit of sound issues earlier.
It was great, Chris. Thank you.
Super. All right, well, let's dive into their ecology real quick. So loons are pretty interesting. Everybody says they're primitive birds, but I would say that they've just spent a lot of time perfecting how to do it right for them, rather than being primitive. Why change if you really have things that are working for you, as long as you have a good population, right? That is always the issue with, with any of us, right? So, but we are lucky to have a summer breeding population of common loons in Washington. They are most easily seen over in the northern and northeastern part of the state because they're on a lot of publicly accessible land. Whereas here in Western Washington, they're often in the reservoirs that are high security, and they have issues on the reservoirs with, water rise and fall, that there's a lot of management put in for that. And then they're on timber farms that require, $300 permits and waking up at 4 a.m. to try and get the permit, and or At times, some of those timber farms have walk-ons, and one can hike to some of these lakes, but it can be a long haul. I know people that have done it, but that is where our loons breed currently. It would be great to see them on less developed lakes in more foothills and lower parts of Washington that match at least one of their lakes in King County. So maybe someday we see that. But anyways, they are obviously fish-eating birds. They spend their breeding periods on freshwater. They spend their wintering periods largely on saltwater. In North America, pardon me, we have about, it's been estimated greater than or equal to at least 250,000 loons in North America. The thick of loons in North America are from the West Coast up through Canada, over through Greenland and Iceland, with very small numbers in Eurasia. So they are largely a Nearctic species and not a Palearctic species. We do have great divers around. There's not many of them that breed. There's a very small population that breeds. And a smaller wintering population than over here in North America too. But they get to see them over there as well. And I actually had an opportunity to see some up in Sweden and Finland many years ago, and it was great. So, but anyways, they look the same and they act the same. So, but in any case, most of them here in North America. They will feed off invertebrates as well for protein sources, and obviously feed that to their young. In Washington, in King County, the smallest lake we have in King County is Lynch Lake, which is about 22 acres or 9 hectares. And it may be the smallest lake territory that we have in the state of Washington. I believe it is. We're in our current draft population status review, and it appears to be, but we're still confirming that. But however, it looks promising. It's a pretty small lake. I don't know how they're going to use much smaller lake. So in any case, if not the smallest lake, the second smallest, but 22 acres, and it's on the Snoqualmie Timber Farm. They also use whole lakes or partial bodies of water, like the reservoirs that tend to be much larger. Will have, at least at one point, we would have multiple territories on them. We do occasionally have a multi-lake territory. In King County, there's one territory, that Lynch Lake territory, that we feel is likely a reservoir/lake territory. Just because it's a small lake and the food resources are much more abundant on the reservoir, and they're within 2 miles of each other, less than that. In 2021, we had our last big push for surveying loons. This season is our next push. We looked at, pardon me, we had 31 known or suspected territories, but some of those were again suspected, or they're in backcountry and hard to get to. So we know we had 29 occupied territories in 2021. And those 29 territories produced 20 chicks, one of which in King County. And that was down in the Green River, Howard Hansen Dam area. Let's see, 17 of those territories were found in Eastern Washington, and 12 of those were in Western Washington. So, and oh, I'm sorry, I have that wrong, folks. 17 active of the 29, 12 produced 20 young. So that's pretty productive, but that's largely coming from the east side of the mountains, which is what I needed to say there. So again, a lot of our production comes from the east side of the mountains. On the west side of the mountains, we will have production, but we have a lot smaller population. So there's a lot of cards stacked against them that way, which we'll talk about later. Winter habitat in Washington is the marine waters of Alaska all the way down to northern Mexico. Also some freshwater impoundments or larger freshwater lakes like Lake Ozette. Even in the resident period, sometimes we'll get non-breeders or floaters that'll end up, they may not even be mature. Our common loons, they are not considered sexually mature until 6 years old, although males will show up maybe at 4 years at their natal lake area, and females no earlier than 5. But the average in general, and there's a pretty bright line, it's 6 years. So you got an animal that takes a while to really start to think about breeding again, and has a steep learning curve once it comes back and tries to start doing that. And then there's some other complications with that regarding their life history that makes it more difficult for them too. So So in our Salish Sea, our Puget Sound Ambient Monitoring Program established a baseline for loons back in 1992. And at that time, we had around, it was 30, looking at my numbers here, 3,600 birds. But the point to take here is that we looked at that data from 99 to 2017, because 99 was our first follow-up survey from the 92. And over those 18 years, we had our wintering population in the Salish Sea decrease an average of 45%. So we went from, in 99, having about one bird per kilometer square on the Salish Sea to about 4 tenths to 5 tenths of a bird, so half of a bird. And that goes through 2017. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any work by our PSAMP group to reanalyze the more recent data. And we've had some changes with how we survey that data now that will probably make it even tighter, where we're using automated cameras and other things on a fixed wing plane rather than having bios counting every single thing into a dictaphone. So that has really improved things over that time period. From that 99 to 2017 period, we had an average yearly drop in wintering loons, common loons in the Salish Sea to about 6.3% each year, with that culminating in that 2017 year of about a 45% drop from 1992. Now, we don't know that means that there are less numbers. That could just be spatial redistribution, prey patterns, things like that. But that does say something. I mean, we obviously are having some shifts. So, and that's what it looks like as far as our wintering birds. So as far as breeding birds, we're going to jump into that a little more now. What do they do to get things going? What are their nuances of breeding? How do they speed date? What does that mean for a loon? A loon, generally, the males will show up first sometime in early to mid-April. Even late March, we have early ice out, but usually in early to mid-April, depending on ice out. And then the female will come about a week and a half later. And then they go through pair bonding. The male prospects for the nest site, shows that to her. If he's a new guy, that doesn't tend to go well. If he's experienced and she's experienced, that tends to go great. They are monogamous, but they can lose mates, obviously due to death or usurpation. When we have another floater bird that's a resident bird in the area, that'll come in and try to take the territory. And we'll talk about that more in detail later. So again, as I said, monogamous, sexually dimorphic males are much bigger. A K-selected species like us humanoids, very long-lived, not going to start breeding until roughly 6 years old. Low reproduction. You got, an animal on average is going to have about 12 chicks in its lifetime, period. Now, again, that's an average, but in any case, not tons. And on top of that, when you have territorial loons in the area, it tends to be a subset of that population that is really creating that productivity. And keep that in mind with Eastern Washington versus Western Washington. So, but they live 30 plus years. The longest lived loon just returned about a week and a half ago to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Her name is Faye. She is 39 years old to our knowledge this year. They know that she was banded, roughly around that 6-year period. So 6-year-old period. So, I mean, she could be older, but they know this animal's 39 years old at least. So, and that's the oldest known loon in the world. In the state of Washington, the Polshooks have a very large data set on Eastern loons, and they've got loons currently, they're in the mid to upper 20s, nearing 30 plus years old. So, so pretty soon here. So we have some birds that are getting there too. So they do get to around 30 plus years. That definitely can happen. I've got a bird that we banded in 2013 that was still seen in 2021. He's going to be 18 this year. So he's middle-aged, even though I keep telling myself he's old. They're very slow to mature, and they just kind of dink around for a while until they get it set with their mate. They tend to have 2 eggs at first, usually by about the end of April, hatching around Memorial Day weekend or the first part of June. If they renest, they usually about 51% of the time will have just 1 egg. And when I've seen them in King County, I've not seen 2 eggs. It's always 1 egg. If there's 2 eggs, it's because a Canada goose egg was put in there. But in any case, they will then nest, let's say about the second and maybe beginning of the 3rd week of June, and then they're going to be hatching sometime around 4th of July or a little later. And so they're running later than the rest of the pairs, but that can happen. We'll have often have a failure at first and then a bird renest in early to no later than the front side of mid-June. So very high phylopatry, very faithful to their territorial sites, very faithful to where they were born, their natal area. And again, subadults will sometimes come back and check things out in that freshwater lake or reservoir around 3 to 4 years old, but they tend to not hang, or they tend to hang on an adjacent unoccupied lake and check things out, because if they spend too much time investigating territorial lakes, they run the risk of getting beat up. So here is an egg from Lynch Lake that we took for analysis in 2013, where we looked at lead and mercury and methyl mercury and a number of other contaminants. This egg came back low to moderate and things, so nothing concerning. But we have had eggs elsewhere in King County come back quite high. And we've had birds test high for mercury in particular. And we'll talk about some of the legacy mercury and methyl mercury conversion on how that is known in the Cascades and in the higher elevations of the Pacific Northwest. A little higher deposition of methyl mercury versus the lowlands, unless you have an acute site that was used in the lowlands. So it's because all that stuff goes up in the air and gets transferred to the mountains. So these are roughly where we see loons in Washington. You can ignore the colors. Those have to do with lakes that are either lead restricted or not. You'll see this again later. But in King County, we have the reservoirs, the Howard Hanson, otherwise known as the Green. We have the Chester Morse, the Cedar Reservoir. We have Lake Hancock and Callaghan Lake, which are on the Snoqualmie Timber Farm. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The South Fork Tolt, 5 bodies of water, and Lynch Lake, 6 bodies of water that regularly get some form of use or occupation. We have some other lakes in the area that will occasionally have a solo bird on it, about 3 to 4 others. So about 10 bodies of water that show loons in any given year, depending on what local resident population we have during that season. So we don't always have most likely the same number of floaters in every given year. So I can't say that for certain because we haven't really kept tabs on floaters at a level that I can say that. But anecdotally, we definitely don't see some of the floaters on the lakes that we tend to see them every single year. So so that varies most likely. And then in some of the reservoirs, we've had multiple territories, like I mentioned in that other slide, particularly the Chester Morse up through about 2006. So that tail end of the 20th century, first part of the 21st, we would have up to 3 to 4 territories there. We still know of them, but usually in the last 10 years or so, we only get 1 or 2 showing interest and then active nesting. So showing interest in occupation, meaning the adults are showing themselves, and then we establish, are the adults showing themselves and staying there? Yes, that's occupying. Then are they going to put an egg down or have young? So yes, they were actively nesting. So in any given year in King County, we're going to have anywhere from 2 to 6 territories, usually 2 to 4, they're active, and usually about 1 of those may have a chick produced. So, and it varies by year. So pretty slow growth there. North American models, this is from Birds of the World, and David Evers, one of the preeminent scientists for loons out of Biodiversity Research Institute, BRI. They estimate that loons have to produce about half a chick fledged per pair annually to support sustainable breeding populations. From what we see in King County, we don't have that. However, in the rest of the state, due to some management efforts, we have seen increasing productivity, and that's been going great. So, and again, with these loons, they're so long lived, the experience and being able to retain their territory means everything as far as like being successful over the long term. Here's a little graph from our draft 2024 population status review for the state of Washington loons. Basically, what you need to see here is that in our 2021 effort, we estimated that the 29 territories we looked at with 12 active and 20 chicks, about 0.66. So just sort of not quite 3/4 of a chick per territory, with North America requiring about 52. So about, again, half of a chick per pair. So 52 hundredths versus 66 hundredths there. So let's see. The other thing about this is that right around here, we started doing more concerted efforts in more standardized survey, and particularly in 2021, where we had a whole protocol and working group establish that. So now we are collecting a little bit more fine data when we have these efforts. So rather than more kind of anecdotal at will when the biologists could get out there as far as with the state. Now we have a lot of collaborators that are also collecting data, and their data goes into this as far as Biodiversity Research Institute, the Polshooks, Forest Service, tribal entities, etc. And we all work together in the working group to try to do what's best for our population here in Washington, keep it hanging on, and hopefully expand over time. So some of the things that are complicating our loons in Washington, and in particularly in Western Washington, is that we have this floater population that prospects for territories. And there's research that shows that these unpaired male loons will actually prospect in the mid to late season looking for chicks in territories that are productive. And then they will try to take that territory, and they will battle often to near death to death with the other male. The females will get into it too. The female will help the male at times too. You know, I don't know the story behind this photo here, but because Dan and Ginger took it, but to me, it looks like a pair that's upset with an intruder. And you'll see that. So particularly like in August, early September, but early August, late July, early August through August. And they will kill the chicks of the pair that's there. If they can, that is one thing they'll do. And this is a big deal because you have often an inexperienced bird that's now sexually mature trying to take over a territory from hopefully an experienced pair. And that doesn't go over well to reset like that all the time. So let's see. That gets at, you know, again, these animals very faithful, coming back to their territories, filling in around their natal lakes where they were born, not moving far from that. Males on average will stay around 7 miles, according to Birds of the World. According to some of the Eastern Washington data, they'll move about 23 miles, so not hugely. And with females averaging about the same in Eastern Washington, but generally throughout their range, about twice as much. So Birds of the World, they will relay 7 miles for males on average to 15 miles on average for females, but up to 40 miles sometimes. Now, from what we've seen, I can speak for Western Washington, we're not seeing that much movement. So in King County, my anecdotal thought is that these birds are moving anywhere from about 2 to 20 miles, and that's it. And so that, again, slows growth, creates mate limitation, particularly if you have constant turnover, and can just create an unstable situation where birds occasionally are successful in breeding, and then you have that wait, that subadult period, and then you have that territorial skirmishes. So there's a lot of things that are going against these large birds that really don't like each other when they're on the same lake during the breeding season, unless you're a mate or a chick. So yes, all of that information taken together is it's a rare breeding species, low productivity, low fecundity, doesn't pump out like bunnies, very long-lived, slow to disperse, even part of its ecology to not disperse far. Slow to colonize, it's not going far. And then in our developed I-5 corridor, how much usable habitat is still left? That's the other thing in Western Washington. And then in Eastern Washington, keeping that development or disturbance to a minimum as the birds fill in out there. Urbanization, definitely a Western Washington thing. What does that do to our loons? Loons in Western Washington, this is Callaghan Lake. This is Shangri-La for loons in King County in Western Washington. This is one of our most productive territories over time. And in recent times seems to have gone through a usurp with another bird, and they are jumping back and forth only 2 miles from this northerly lake, Callaghan Lake, to Lake Hancock, just south, for 2 miles away. And so that has caused some issues with what we feel is likely a younger mate. They're not banded, so we can't tell. But we've seen this before with banded birds on these bodies of water, where younger mates come in and then they are just, I'm going to be honest, kind of stupid for like 3 to 5 seasons, which does not help you increase your population. But beautiful spot, looks loony to me. They use it. This is the landscape they are in King County. Here we have the North Fork Tolt. Here we have Lynch Lake. Here we have Callaghan. Here we have Hancock. And then down in here is the Chester Morse and the Green, which you'll see in a forthcoming slide. But I wanted to really drill in on these northerly sites, because these are the two really productive ones. We're dealing with water level issues here. We're dealing with water level issues on the other two reservoirs. Seattle Public Utilities does a great job. They put out platforms. One here, they put a couple platforms out on the Chester Morse. Same with Tacoma Water for the Green. They put out triple booms that are really good with the water flux. They just kind of lay down at the end of the season when it gets dry. And they are not as easily influenced by wood that's moving through those reservoir systems. Think about that. Those reservoirs are canyons. They didn't used to be lakes. I mean, the Chester Morse was a small lake, and it's moving a lot of wood and other materials through there in that canyon, in those canyons that are much different than how wood moves through these guys, although wood moves through these guys during the ice period, during the winter period as well. So we have to take our platforms off of here every fall, because if we don't, the wood moving through these places will either sink them or pull them elsewhere, and they can be hard to find then. So it's a lot of work to put these platforms out, and they're quite heavy. So we're going to go back here. Here we go. So loons, pardon me. As I mentioned, in King County, they're all around 2 to 12 miles apart. Back in 1896, I believe, was the last, quote, lowland common loon documented nesting in King County, and that was at Lake Wilderness, where our little circle is here. And that's about 13 miles down here to the Howard Hansen, and it's about 13 and a half here. So about equidistant. And they will puddle jump from Lake Washington, Lake Sammamish, some of these Youngs, Wilderness. We have both eBird data and also audio recording unit data that shows that they're out in those areas amongst us and our collaborators, but they don't stay in these areas. So I've heard loons in late March, early April, when we've had ice up here, and they're going back and forth, yodeling, tremolo, all that. Whether there are resident birds or northerly birds pushing through, I can't say. But I can say that that's pretty regular across these two lakes if you're right place, right time. They don't hang there that long. So you got an animal that maybe will spend a week there, 5 days, and then push off and keep puddle jumping to higher elevation. So, but here's that kind of bright line. They get through about here, and you don't see them stay. They will stay on some of these, or at least hang for a while. So we have another lake here, Black Lake, that will have birds and pairs come and show themselves, but they don't seem to be using it. We've had the same thing with some of these 3 lakes here that are fine lakes, but they don't seem to actually sit down and use it. Why? I can't tell you. The fish populations appear fine. These lakes are a little more acidic. They have more kind of bog-associated wetland species, but that hasn't been a problem for them on other lakes that have a more acidic, water and soil. Lynch being one of them, with a lot of sundew and bog rosemary and etc. So what does this mean? When you have many territories of loons on landscape and you get a couple non-territorials coming back, but they're like, hey, I was born around here and I feel like I need to find a mate and it's time to speed date. When they speed date, these two have the option of usurping this one, usurping this one, usurping this one, usurping this one. You know, there are options. If this guy gets usurped, well, this one might pair up with that one. No harm, no foul for these, right? They may pair with each other, right? So this is limited because there's not a lot of loons here. But in comparison to this, I think hopefully you see the difference here. If this bird tries to pair with this bird, then we have a loner that's then trying to usurp probably this bird or just hanging out for example, my 2013 bird, we didn't note him until 2017. We thought he was dead. Then we saw him again in 2021. He's around. He's just not showing himself much. He's the last remaining banded bird in Western Washington, as far as I understand. So all of our other banded birds that were on the reservoirs have all been usurped or died now. This 2013 Callaghan male, who was a very big bird, Dr. Jim Peruk, who helped, he came out and helped me and other staff ban that bird and its mate, who came into a floating net at the same time. He'd never gotten two loons at the same time. It was one of the biggest common loons in Washington, if not the biggest that he had ever banded and worked with us on. And then he promptly got usurped the next year. So apparently he's a kitten. So do we see an Ali effect, and particularly in our Western Washington birds? I would argue we're vacillating around that, and that goes along with statements by some of our preeminent loon biologists in the world. Dr. Dave Evers with BRI at one point said Western Washington really was posing a sink in common loons and may be extirpated soon. It has not yet, but I can't really explain why not, other than we get lucky every once in a while. And currently in the last 8 years or so, 8 seasons, we've not been getting lucky. And this is not just me saying this. I've been talking about it with some of the other land manager bios, the bio for SPU, bio for the green there with U.S. Army Corps. And we all have concern for Western Washington loons. And can we manage Western Washington loons perhaps differently than Eastern Washington loons? Or can we use some of Eastern Washington loons techniques to help bolster our Western Washington loons and get them over a potential, what I perceive as a hump? This is my professional opinion, not the state's, but it matches all the definitions here. And this is a thing with loons. There are a number of papers out there about how a lack of floating population and that constant turnover can create mate limitation and this Ali effect. So an Ali effect, if you haven't read this already, is where population growth rate decreases as population size decreases, which is exactly what we're having. And it can negatively impact common loon populations, particularly when the densities are low, which is what we have, potentially leading to extinction due to difficulties in finding mates or other social benefits. Now, I would extend that to social interactions. And that's by Dr. Vince Spagnuolo, who was with BRI and is now with another preeminent loon organization out of Wyoming. And this was part of his, I believe, his PhD effort at Harvard. So smart guy, great guy, really enjoyed working with him. Hopefully can work with him again. So BRI, one of the things that they have just pioneered is translocation of loons. It's never, ever been done before. They have done it back in, I think 16, 17, 18, 19. They took, pardon me, let me get a drink. Around 24 birds, a portion of them from Maine and a portion of them from New York. I think, if I recall, most of them coming from Maine. And they took those birds to an area of Massachusetts, which has about, so we have around 34 known territories in the state of Washington. A number of those not being active, they're just known. They're either historic and we haven't seen them used for a while. Or in my case, the reservoirs have multiple nest sites, but the reservoir itself is functioning as a one territory system for quite a while now. So we have some of that regression of nest site use that our data doesn't necessarily always show, or we haven't quite parsed out yet because of how in the past it was more ad hoc and now we're doing more concerted efforts. So we'll be able to get good data that way. But anecdotally, it really shows that in Western Washington, in my opinion, across not just King County, up north in the North Cascades, which is where the other breeding loon pair will occasionally show up. And we've had resident birds showing up on the Olympic Peninsula, so that's promising, but to my knowledge, there's no nesting out there yet. I could be wrong there because I'm the King County guy. So, but I've not seen that in data. So, but if we do, it's very recent. So, I know a lot of biologists on all sides of me have spent a lot of time looking for common loons in the exact same bodies of water that we have in King County, and nothing. So, and part of that is that spatial biology there and how they come back to their area, how they get a mate, how they take over a territory. That's driving all that. So they took these chicks that were all around what we call fledged age. So, a loon's on its nest for about a month, roughly. And then they have their chicks, let's say 2, may end up being 1 because of prey resources or whatnot. Eagle takes it out or something else. I've had bear check out loon nests and swim to them and swim away. So there's a lot of things out there that can take loon. But they moved about 24 of these 6-week-old chicks. They were 6 to 9 weeks old because at 6 weeks, the chicks can dive and actively feed themselves. So they're considered fledged. They don't really need the adults. The adults help keep vigilance for them and communicate with them, but they don't need them to feed and take care of themselves anymore. It's just an extra pair of eyes on eagles in the sky. So they moved those guys and they put them in these pens like this. So it's very, California condor, can't see out, dumping prey fish in there. They're eating them. And then they started releasing them at like the 10 to 12 week when we start to see on the early end of loons starting to take first flight to the later, more average portion of time when loons take first flight around 12 weeks. Pardon me. And they dropped the pens, let the loons out. The loons went off on their winter, and lo and behold, 3 to 4 years back, they had some of them come back, and they had 2 of them pair up. So they've now at least established a pair through this process. And I understand they're going to do it again here, and they have desire to do it in some of the western states, with Wyoming being shortlisted because one of their funding sources that pocketbooked at this is in Wyoming, a loon, the entity that Dr. Spagnuolo works for. And it would be a good area with a lot of public land to trial this. So when it comes to Wyoming, if it comes to Wyoming, I can't say, but I have my fingers crossed because I feel like this might be one way, along with maybe prey assistance and just education, to help our Western Washington birds. So they just seem to be in a vortex of not getting bigger and slowly getting smaller, and then maybe having 1 or 2 successes. So they go back up to the baseline again. They just don't seem to really expand. So that's like even that Lynch Lake, that's likely been used for years. It's so close to the South Fork Tolt in such a small lake. My thought is that bios didn't check it in the past because it's just not, it's not the same kind of lake we'd see them at. And in talking with past bios and enforcement, no one did ever check that lake. And we got note of it because a medical doctor and his son was up there and saw two adult loons and a chick, an older chick. And so we went up there, and by gosh, there they were. And I haven't heard an update since the last report they gave on like a pair coming back and successfully having a chick. But my assumption, without talking to them, is that perhaps that pair's come back again and hopefully at least attempted. But that's something I need to follow up with them. And I think the exciting thing here for Washington is that it can be done. And there were many people that thought that it couldn't, but Dr. Evers did. And what he basically thought was these animals don't orient on their natal sites until they pick up and do their first flight and navigate to the salt or to large freshwater impoundments like Lake Pateros on Columbia, which those understandably are generally the eastern Washington birds. But again, at one point, that's an interesting fact. We used to have wintering birds on the Chester Morse years back, according to the biologist that's now retired there, Dwayne Page. And he said over time that just kept going and going and going. So that perhaps may go along with the thick of the birds that are out on the Salish Sea. As far as what we're surveying in winter, is that they either are spatially redistributing or maybe we have a population drop. And, that's something that's going to be needing to be more examined as we, have our, technology allow us to get finer detail with our survey methods, and also working across borders from Alaska, Canada, all the way down to northern Mexico, and looking at wintering populations there versus the other wintering populations in the United States, like the Great Lakes, the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, depending on who you are, but Gulf of Mexico, and also the Atlantic coast. And another thing that BRI has found, which is kind of interesting, at least on their eastern birds and Great Lakes birds, is that the birds that have to travel farther for their wintering sites, so the birds coming from the Great Lakes going to the Gulf of Mexico, are smaller on average, significantly, than birds that are breeding closer to like the Atlantic. So kind of like our birds on the west side of the mountains here. If that trend's not been really examined here, but if it holds, then our birds that are closer to the salt are likely a little bigger than the ones that have to go up over the mountains. And they definitely will. There have been loons noted flying during the migratory period, during the resident return period, over the Cascades. I think one that the Polshooks were in contact with someone about, it was right at Snoqualmie Pass, actually. So just like some of our trumpeter swans that I know Martha has relayed to people go over the passes, our common loons do too. So anyhow, lead, bad, right? Yeah, lead. Lead is a problem for loons, as is with all birds and other wildlife. So loons, this is the kind of size of the stones that, and pebbles that they'll put in their gizzard. And you can see that's very similar to the size of these lead weights that we're looking at that are about 1.5 inches on the long axis. And here's some line too that came out of this bird. So not good. Only takes a little bit of that to end up with lead toxicosis. So here you can see the blue bodies of water are our lead restricted bodies of water that were put through the commission over a decade. Well over a decade ago. I apologize, folks. Let me drink some tea here. And then the red ones are ones that are publicly accessible, can be fished, etc., that are most at risk because they aren't lead restricted. And then we have our black ones that tend to be either on land restricted areas like tribal lands, or in a high security area. Like here we have reservoirs that people can't just go right into. And so those are less concerned because people aren't fishing on those bodies of water. So particularly in the Western Washington that I'm most familiar with, people are not fishing on these bodies of water that are black. So that's our drinking water and power source. Okay, so mortalities. And this has already changed actually, but through 2023, our largest source of mortalities in our resident loons was gunshot, unfortunately, and lead. And in Western Washington, we've seen methylmercury crop up in some of our birds, but the sample lot size is very, very low. However, the situation and what we know about how mercury is deposited both through aerial deposits and also legacy like mine tailings, and also in the reservoirs where you have a lot of rise fall action and scouring that can remove some of these mercury or even tailings from the area. And then when they get down in the water, the prey sources, the insects, invertebrates, benthic invertebrates, will convert that mercury to methyl mercury, which is the nasty stuff. And then the birds will eat the fish that eat the invertebrates, and they get a little bit of a load. So whether it's going craziness, we don't know. And we don't know exactly where all of that's coming from. The lead obviously is largely coming from fishing, but the methyl mercury could be coming from the wintering areas. It could be coming from the breeding sites. It's hard to say. And the numbers we have are smaller. And since then, in 2024, we had 5 other birds shot. We had one whole family shot and taken out in Eastern Washington. And then we had another bird that was shot along with about 20 other American coots that also perished. So that gunshot is now the most common way that loons are dying as of our current data from 2007 through current. And that is in Eastern Washington, those gunshots. So how are loons protected? They are classified as protected species sensitive. So they are one of our 3 state listed species, and that would be endangered, which is its own codification. I don't show that. Or protected threatened or protected sensitive. And so these are our other state listings. Okay. So other things that are sensitive, like American white pelican, for example. And then other are things like peregrine falcon, red-tailed hawk, not to focus on raptors, American robin, any MBTA bird that's not a game bird is protected under state law, and that includes its nests, eggs, or the birds proper, and that is the empty nest. The state is most concerned about nests that are reused across seasons, so like osprey nests. But if someone calls us in October and says, I think I have a robin nest in my ewe in the front and I need to trim that bush, can I take that nest out? We will tell them, yes, the birds will not reuse it next year. Please feel free to destroy the nest. And that's something that MBTA does not do. We protect the pile of twigs. So, and here is another example of a sensitive species in the state of Washington that's even made some interesting forays into Western Washington. I'm sure many are familiar with that here. So last year I was out with collaborators, including Elaine, and we were maintaining purple martin gourds up the Duwamish, and we had at least 3, if not 5, American pelicans just go right up the Duwamish, headed north towards Whidbey, and then a loon on the water. So it was a sensitive species day right in the Duwamish in the Superfund area. So don't get that all the time. It's great. So these guys, like I said, we had a family taken out. If a family is taken out, there are penalties. Right now, there are standing rewards that we'll get to. But the biggest thing that comes with protected or state threatened or state sensitive is this: someone's maliciously hunting fishes takes. So you take the bird, you take the eggs, you take the nest without a permit or verbal approval from us. You purposely, maliciously harass. So iterative disturbance that's known, the species, the occurrence is known. It is obvious that the harassment is happening. It is documentable, and it is obvious that it is due to the entity that full well knows that that protected species is occurring at that time. So that's rare. It's a little squishy, but that is there. We've worked with a number of people regarding that for various projects, et cetera, and trying to give birds a bit of a protected wildlife in general, not just birds, a bit of a leg up for disturbance and trying to get some mitigation efforts there. Let's see. The rest of this is a lot of mumbo jumbo, but I encourage you to look at it. The big thing is that in that code, it's a $2,000 fine for the death of a loon. That also includes peregrines, bald eagles, and a few other species in there with that. So not all of the state sensitive or threatened, or it's ones that we see shot more often. So, so this was one of the birds that was taken recently. Oh, and that's Dan Polshuk right there, if you're not familiar with him, although I'm sure most people here are. Great guy, and has dedicated all of his retirement to loons, and has really taught, he and his wife Ginger have taught me and a number of other bios so much. And just wonderful people. So here's one from a while ago, 2010. Here's the one I mentioned in 2024, 20 plus birds shot. They were coots. One was it was a loon. They were all federally protected, but the loon. And then in final, it was the 4 past June there at Beaver Lake on the Colville National Forest out east, and it was both chicks and both adults. So people, unfortunately, are jerks. And there is an $8,000 plus reward out there for that Beaver Lake family. So this is them without one of the adults. Very unfortunate. Mercury, I mentioned that. So above 3 parts per million is where we see drops in reproduction. Again, I mentioned this this mercury is coming from aerial deposition from coal burning and other industry burning situations where the scrubbing is not getting all of that out. Also legacy from that, legacy deposits, tailings. We have cinnabar in Washington, and that has been heavily mined to then convert it to mercury, and then the tailings sometimes can be left on site, and that can cause problems. And also gold, both placer and holder gold, they use mercury to extract the gold. And so there's legacy mercury in the environment because of gold mining as well. So anyhow, some examples in the area that I'm sure you're all very familiar with: the Asarco copper smelter, and obviously a lot of gold. It's synergistic. It's all of this stuff. And we're not nearly as high as some other areas of the United States, but we are high for the Pacific Northwest, and it's the west side that tends to be higher because we have all that deposition. The mountains block that stuff from going east. We have mining. We've had all that on our landscape and continue to have some of that on our landscape. And so in both the state and with our collaborators like BRI, when they've tested for mercury, the east side of the mountains tend to have, they aren't elevated really. They have some, but it's not in a concerning state. Whereas in the low numbers we have in Western Washington, we have seen that. So for example, we banded that Callaghan male in 2013. He was just below the 3 at 2.35 parts per million, moderate impact status. The highest in our 2013 statewide efforts with BRI, where they were testing a number of different birds. So that again says, hey, Western Washington bird, but not super concerning or anything. However, from a reservoir in 2009, we had the highest thus far in Washington. And that level, when you start getting over that 3, and particularly in 5, you start having it can be detrimental effects to breeding and even just locomotion and things. So that bird didn't show that, but he sure was hot. So anyhow, predation by bald eagles, I've mentioned. We've seen this on a number of species. If anybody's been watching heron colonies, that's a great example. Same thing with our loons. We tend to put up loon protection teepees and other overhead structures to try to keep eagles off of the platforms, for example, or nest sites when they're on the shore, like on a log or on the shoreline. Commercial marine bycatch, net line entanglement, derelict gear are all source too, but not as much as everything else we've talked to so far. They are a lot in acute instances, like when we have the Gulf oil spill or we have, something like that. So getting to oil spills, also a significant threat in acute manner. And then in Eastern Washington, they've been dealing with, we have lakes that freeze over and it kills the fish. And so what collaborators, nonprofit collaborators and others, including BRI, have worked with the state in our fish program, at times buying fish to stock a variety of sizes of trout in catchable trout and sizes for chicks in our northern and northeast lakes that have winter kill. And that has shown an increase in productivity. But whether that's sustainable once we cut them off, that's a question. So will they start just to recede again back to a threshold like Western Washington that just vacillates around? Or will they get over a hump and keep growing? I hope so. So I'm not as jazzed into the Eastern birds, but I'm in conversation with the bios and nonprofits over there a lot. And overall, that seems to be a theme that everybody has a bit of a concern over, and we can't predict, right? So they're growing right now, and that's what's great. Some conservation things conservation efforts of the state. A big one is our state wildlife action plan, which if you're not familiar with, which I think most people in WASP would be, but if you're not, go to our website, go to Google or Bing and put W.D.F.W SWAP. That's the acronym, and it'll bring it up and read about that. This is a management plan for the state's non-game and certain game animals that require assessment and management and interactive monitoring and reassessing. And it's been federally mandated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it extends to all 50 states and all 5 U.S. territories. And so the feds have required this of us. So, and if you're familiar with that, there's been a struggle in the United States ever since that requirement to get federal funding for that regularly. So, and that's still a need there. But recently the state of Washington has ponied up some more biodiversity funds in a one-time effort, and that assisted the state of Washington quite a bit. So hopefully moving forward, we are not in a great fiscal state currently, but at some point the state can find more funding for its non-game efforts, and we'll be humming on at least, let's say, 4 cylinders of the 6-cylinder engine. So, or half the battery of the electric car. But we're doing good. I mean, it was great. We got more done in the last few years since that money came in than my entire career in 20 years. So there was just, everybody was doing everything. So it's needed. This is to benefit species of greatest conservation need, loons being one of them, because of their population status and their low numbers in the state of Washington. I mentioned that, and particularly in Eastern Washington, where our collaborators tend to band annually, there are a lot of banded birds in Eastern Washington. We do occasionally get one in Western Washington, and when we have ability to band them in our scheduling, either collaboratively or ourselves, like with, you see me there previously, I was banding a bird that was found in the middle of a field in Enumclaw and brought into pause. So, and has not been recited, but it was a young bird. So, gee, I don't remember when that was. It probably wouldn't return until last year, this year anyways. And we don't know if that bird came from King County or if it was coming over the mountains. So hard to say. But so I encourage you to look for these bands. This is at BRI's website. They've got a Washington page and a banding page. You can familiarize yourself with all the different combinations. They are most easily seen when the loons do a foot waggle, which is a bit of a stretch and a non-communicative communication, physical communication, kind of, hey, everything's okay. I'm over here. I'm waggling. I'm okay. They're not quite sure exactly what it means, but that's the idea, is that it's kind of like a hoot, but they can do it farther off. The animal can see it. Because they're farther off. So if you find loons, please go to our Report Wildlife Observations. That's at Get Involved. And then under that page, it'll be Report Wildlife Observations, or you can put that in the web, WDFW Report Wildlife Observations. And you can not go through your slides so fast, and you can report that stuff down here. Okay. Other things we do, periodic monitoring, as I mentioned, the platforms. Here's that triple boom that the green has. Here's some of the 5x5 platforms that we put out on the natural lakes. We also, this is the predator guards here. This is a predator guard here where the loons tend to like a little depression there. And then currently we're in FERC relicensing with the South Fork Tolt with SPU and as far as that goes, and they are doing a number of studies related to loons, including a fish composition study that, as it stands now, is going to look at mercury loads in the fish as well, the prey. So that's great. We put cameras out. This is a camera that the U.S. Army Corps put on the green, the Howard Hansen reservoir there, the Green River watershed. You can see that depression that they like there. We also put cameras out on our smaller 5x5 timber standard platforms, and we'll get things like bands occasionally or egg drop, etc. However, recently, birds haven't been using on the west side in King County our platforms, so we're not quite sure. We put out signage, help keep this lake safe for loons. Our collaborators here on the Snoqualmie Timber Farm, Campbell Global, who made this sign, us, BRI, our research collaborator. And then for our lead restricted lakes, we put up signs like this. We actually just put out a newer sign that has a little more information than this sign. So that is all I've got. I want to thank everybody for their time and for the dealing with the drop off and coverage there. Hopefully you can still hear me and I'm still here. These are my acknowledgments to everybody that's been involved, plus more in our working group. If I've missed you, it's only because Anderson forgets. It's not that I did it on purpose. The citations, information are found in our periodic status review, and also Elaine will be providing some of those, the thick of them, to all. And I, again, want to thank Dan and Ginger Polshuk for all of their efforts in the state of Washington, their sharing of data and sharing of photos and video and thoughts and loon biology to our biologists and to citizens in Washington, and their tireless advocacy for common loons. Hopefully someday, maybe in my children's generation, we have loons in Oregon again. and then maybe California. But right now we just need them to expand on the west side too, like the east side. So that's all I got. Here are bear doing what bear want to do. They aren't getting in trash. We got a little guy here in August following its mom up at Hardscrabble Lakes in King County. And if you got questions, this is how you get a hold of me.
Man, oh man. Chris, we want to send you a ton of cough drops and our thanks.
Yeah, sorry,
gosh,
I ran a little bit over due to under the weather and dropping off there, but I just appreciate
well,
everyone who held on, and I'm happy to
heroic.
take
More than
take
worth it. I
any
wish we had a way of finding a group card to send it to Dan and Ginger. I just never heard of such a concerted effort by somebody, two people that have made such a difference. And gosh, that's what we all want to do now, make a difference.
decades. Those
A couple,
decades they've
there's a
been
couple nice,
involved and collaborated.
comments. Let me see. Sammy mentioned that she saw and heard a breeding plumage loon on Rattlesnake Lake a few days ago.
Entirely possible, and yes, they have been there lately.
So.
So we haven't
Neil
seen
and Carly were one.
Yeah, we haven't seen them breed on Rattlesnake, and there's water flux there too. But I've always wondered about, that the far area lake where the the old stumps and everything are in there, because that offers some cover. But with such use of the lake, I don't think they're going to do it. So that's a puddle jump site. Basically, they either come in there to feed or hang from the Chester Morse, or vice versa. They're puddle jumping and they're going up into the Chester Morse. And that's what both the bios there and us communicating in arrival dates, that's what we've seen. So yeah, we'll see loons on Rattlesnake, Lake Youngs, but you can't get into there. Again, the big lakes, Sammamish, Lake Washington, Pine Lake, Lake Margaret, that's just on the north border of King County, just north of Duval. That's still King County. We tend to see birds show up regularly, like at some of these lakes during opening day weekend. Shock surprise. So that's when all the hatchery catchable trout are at their maximum at those lakes, and that's when it's opening day to go fishing. And we always have a lot of eagles, osprey, and then occasionally a loon will show up on one of these lakes that's somewhat near where we know their territorial lakes are. And whether it's the same bird or not, we don't know, but they're floating around. So, I mean, if people see them, please do report them. Look for those bands. You're going to see more of those over in the northeast part of the state, just because our partners over there are actively banding and they have a research permit to do all that.
How do you get a loon to foot waggle?
They just sort of do it, when they're loafing. Pardon me, folks. When they're loafing on the water, they'll like stretch their wing and things like that. And then every once in a while, you'll see that foot come up kind of back, and they'll go like that. And usually there's another animal somewhere in the view somewhere. You may not see that animal, but then maybe it comes out because that was a non-vocal, hey, it's okay, I'm over here, the eagle's gone. But who knows what they're really saying, because it's non-vocal, and but it tends to act like that. It tends to act of like, hey, this is okay, I'm right over here. But I've also seen usurp birds that sometimes go back and forth foot waggling because maybe they've been bluffed, and so that's just
I suppose there's some of us who are possessed right now with band readings.
Yeah.
But different. It's a little easier when they're perched on a branch, but if you get a foot waggle, you're going to have one leg, and I guess having half the color banding is better than
they'll stretch it way out.
It on both legs, right?
Yeah, and I see it most with territorial birds, but I've seen it in the winter on birds close in, like at Carkeek or Richmond Beach, but calm waters and another bird around. And in winter, common loons they don't kind of tend to group, so it's that rare situation. I've seen it once, but on the freshwater lakes, I've seen it many times. So and it's really just this kind of nonverbal, non-vocal. Here I am, I'm okay. It could mean something like the eagle's gone. There's a number of speculation out there. It functions very similar to kind of the whale and tremolo combination, where it can be just, I'm here, things are good, or stuff's about ready to go south. I need you to be on alert. So, but usually with the foot waggle, it doesn't seem
Our
to be that
president,
south.
Dave Kraft, our president, Dave Kraft, pointed out that he's up in Kettle Falls, Ponderay.
Oh
The
yeah,
common loons also winter Lake Roosevelt on the Columbia River
yes, and
regularly.
Pateros. Yeah, Roosevelt, Pateros, and a number of the other impoundments. Correct. I mentioned Pateros earlier, but I didn't get into all of them just because I'm a little more focused on King County. But 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, they're on less commonly, but yeah, they've had banded birds from eastern Washington found on those impoundments, and other birds unbanded on those impoundments, but not to the same level of wintering birds on the Salish Sea, though. But 100%, they're out there. So, and again, some of the reservoirs used to have wintering populations as well, 30 years ago.
I know several of us were eager to learn if there was anything more discovered on that horrible murder of loons. I guess you imply from what you told us that no one's been found.
No, I checked back with enforcement about half a month ago, and there's nothing that's progressed to my knowledge. So it still applies. It's still out there, and this is the hard thing, right? I mean, if you don't have someone standing there and documenting, and it's not obvious, then there's a hard hill to climb. So, and it's
we don't put wanted posters out on the lake. Wanted.
Oh no, pardon me, that sign that you saw, that was posted around to my knowledge. That's my understanding. Again, it wasn't in my area, but talking with Dan and Ginger and some of the other bios up there, Jeff Heinlein in the Okanagan, my understanding is that those signs went out. I'm not sure if they went out in Heinlein's area because that lake, I believe, is farther to the east, Big Meadow. So I think it's on Colville. So
well,
that's
going to be the nadir, the lowest point of our conversation. I have a question. Does re-nesting occur only when there's been a nest failure, or do some pairs raise two sets in one season?
Yeah, they usually double clutching is so this is briefly talked on. I'm not a researcher here, but it's briefly chatted on in like Birds of the World, and I've talked a little bit with BRI about this. And I think the overarching evidence is that it's been egg dumps. So they've got two eggs and another pair dumps another egg or two, and not necessarily re-nesting. It's usually that I failed. It's before June 15th ish, and I'm going to put another egg down because I failed. But you get past that second to third week of June, really second week, and they're just not going to do anything anymore. So what I've seen in King County is when they re-nest, they'll have their chicks around 4th of July rather than Memorial Day. So they're a month behind. So, and I see that much more common on the natural lakes than the reservoirs. The reservoirs have more water access problems, and the natural lakes tend to have a little more predation problems in King County.
Those of you who are thinking of more questions, please feel free to either unmute and speak up or type it in. Here's a nice question. To you, Chris, personally, when you say you've been able to accomplish more with SWAP than you have in your entire career, can you elaborate? What kinds of things have you been able to do which you weren't?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So if you've been following the department, this last biennium, the department and others were successfully given a biodiversity influx of money, specifically to manage our biodiversity resources and planning and everything. And that was a long time coming. And it was a one-time shot, but with the idea is that if things go well, it will be sustained. However, we're in a bad fiscal environment currently. But yeah, that is the desire of the legislature when they passed that, was to have that become permanent. And so that is kind of our next thing, is when can they afford to turn that thing back on? Because they've said we could have it. So, but we have some. If you put in like a Google or Bing and put, WDFW biodiversity funding legislature, it should come up. And we've had announcements that do a much better, more in the weeds description of what I'm providing to you. I know our our diversity species manager, Hannah Anderson, would be able to whip this off with her eyes closed. And also our endangered species manager, Julia Smith. But yeah, that's my basic understanding. We were allocated that this last biennium. It went great. We got a lot of stuff outstanding for the entire time I've been here started, which was insane. But there's a whole lot more to do, and that was just one shot. So, good question. And part of that is making up for
Anyone
the
else?
feds not providing funding. So the state decided they needed to do something. Oh, geez.
Well, all of you other nice folks may not know, but I have the huge privilege of working with a little bit in some other work, and he is really. This is supposed to be a compliment, not you're not some sort of evil creature beneath the sea.
Did I mention I
He's.
have 2 boys? This is great.
I'll send it to you. Um, with a little pause here, I think you have, well, the presentation by itself was just excellent. Of course, you covered everything, so no one has any other questions that they can think of. Can't
Yeah.
thank you enough, Chris. This is our final speaker of the year, and what a knockout talk you've given us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks. This is a newer talk, so I'm always taking input or thoughts or, hey, have you thought about covering this? So, I mean, please, my door is always open, and not always just loons either. We're looking for all species of greatest conservation needs. At my last talk, I got to speak with someone about western fence lizard that have been recently seen at a site that we've not gotten to for a while, so that was great. Um, it takes a village, and yeah, as far as loons, please report them to us, and please do familiarize yourself with the state species of greatest conservation need. Those are the species that we're really looking for. And thank you all for your advocacy for wildlife, for birds, for ornithology, for science, and for partnering with us when it makes sense, and for holding us to the fire. So, but in any case, I was a little rambly tonight because I'm under the weather. I was a little bit shorter in my last talk with this, but I appreciate everybody's patience. And if you've got any questions or thoughts, let me know, because if I can't answer it, I can get some of our BRI counterparts, like including Dan and Ginger, to give you an answer or put you in contact. So, anyways, thanks for having me. Thanks for having
I
Fish and
put
Wildlife.
your email address in the chat if anyone is interested. And please do remember, if you click on any of those links, you'll have them after we close down our Zoom meeting. Once again, Chris, top notch. Thank you so very much.
Well, thanks for having me. And I just really appreciate that everybody's interested in the breeding loons of Washington, because they are few and far between. Like I said, we got about 34 known or historic sites. Let's say anywhere in the upper 20s to lower 30 or 31, or maybe active at any given time. That's off the top of my head. But, that first year we had 29 known in 2021, and 27 were occupied and only 12 produced, if you recall from that. So that's kind of the thing every year. And then, on the west side, it's maybe we get 1 or 2 chicks every, off the top of my head, 2 or 3 seasons in a good 10-year period. Over the last 2 decades, and looking at some of the bio data from the 90s. I heard from someone internally, and I haven't found it in writing, but at some point, we didn't have any nests established from like 49 to 79. And then there was only like 2 nests found, I believe in King County, in the 80s. And so we've gotten to 30-ish, which is great, but that's still small. Idaho has none. They just have birds that come through. Wyoming and Montana have kind of low double digits like us, 50, 60, roughly, without me looking it back up. But so the whole West Coast is kind of hurting. So anything people can do to advocate for loons and keep this Northwoods bird around and maybe expand its range into its former southerly areas, that would be fantastic for future generations. So, and what a cool bird. I'm biased, but they're pretty cool. So, thanks. Well, thank you for having
All
me.
right, take care of
And if you
yourself.
have any questions, yeah, any questions, shoot me an email or give me a call. Take care, folks. Have a nice